All right. Well, good evening, Christ community. So glad that you have joined us for this event on navigating AI through the eyes of faith. My name is Nathan. I'm one of the pastors here, and it is just a delight. I love it when we do these things for a lot of reasons. I love that we get to learn together and grow together. I also love it when we get the opportunity to gather from all across our campuses together, and knowing too that there are folks from other churches joining us here as well. We're so grateful that you are a part of this with us. And for those of you who are a part of Christ community, you know that we are passionate about connecting our Sunday faith to our Monday lives, right? We talk about that week after week. We want to do that in every capacity of our lives. And what is more Monday right now than the emerging technologies that we find ourselves with of artificial intelligence? It's everywhere around us, right? I know many of you, even as you came in, were talking to me about the ways in which you use it. And we as followers of Jesus, we want to know what our response is. How do we use this well? What are the advantages? Also, what are some of the things that we should just be aware of to be concerned for, you know? We want to enter that space thoughtfully. We don't have all the answers on those questions, as you'd probably assume. I doubt Dr. Dyer does as well. But we're going to begin the conversation tonight. We'll have a couple of panelists as well to learn from, and we're just really, really excited. Dr. Dyer, thank you for being here with us. Let me tell you a little bit about him. So Dr. John Dyer is the VP for Enrollment and Educational Technology, an assistant professor of theological studies at Dallas Theological Seminary, where he earned his THM before completing his PhD in sociology of religion at Durham University. Dr. Dyer has made his living as a coder for many years and has become a thought leader on the topic of technology and its impact for us. I first encountered him probably 10 years ago when I read his book, Garden to the City, which has recently come out in a new edition. He's got a couple other resources out there, and so I know you want to grab those, pick those up, take a look at them. But that impacted me that was a long time ago, and I just even made the connection. Hey, you're here. That's fun. That's really fun. Dr. Dyer lives in the Dallas area with his wife, his two children as well. We've been talking about raising high school students in this world of technology, right? It's very, very live and fresh for many of us. So let me pray for us and for him, and then we'll welcome Dr. Dyer to the platform together. Let me pray. Father, we are so grateful that you have not left us alone in the midst of all of the complexities and brokenness and beauty in this world that you have made. And so we are grateful that we have, even in this space, as we talk about anything, right? Your Spirit is with us as your people, guiding us, directing us. We pray that you would fill Dr. Dyer even now as he comes up to speak these things to us. We're also thankful, certainly, yes, for your presence, your Spirit's presence with us, but we're also so thankful that we have each other. Even as we wrestle through so many different things in our lives and our world, none of us on any subject has to do that in isolation. And we're just grateful for that, for community, for people to wrestle with, to laugh with, to cry with. God, what a gift that is. And so even as we enter into these spaces together tonight, would you give us open hearts, open minds, an eagerness to listen, to learn, to be challenged, to grow, and to connect our Sunday faith to our Monday lives and everything that we do. To be glorified, Lord Jesus, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Would you welcome with me Dr. John Dyer?
Thank you. Well, thank you all so much for having me. I mean, it's amazing to see a huge group like this come on a Monday night to talk about something so well done, y'all. What a great community you've cultivated. And really, they said I could say just about anything I wanted about AI or anything, as long as I don't talk about Kansas City barbecue and Texas barbecue, I'm okay. So I feel safe with y'all. I do love my own native foods, but I also love to try other foods. So my favorite food is something I haven't tried before, and we had some excellent barbecue today, so that was really fun. And I think there might be a prize later on, so keep that in mind. Well, as you can see, you got a lovely, AI-generated image of a robot priest here, and so we get to talk about AI. But first, I want to introduce myself just a little bit more, and then also introduce you to one another just for a minute. So the first thing I want to do is just kind of talk about what I do. So, the bio said, I still spend time doing a little bit of programming here and there, and got to build some neat things I'll tell you a little bit about, and get to teach theology at a seminary level, and that's been a lot of fun. And I still love studying people and how they work. And as you know, we're in the midst of tremendous cultural change in the United States and around the world. There's so many new technologies, new things happening, growth, change. And it's fun to study those things and look at them through the lens of faith and say, how do we minister to this world and this time now? And so I appreciate that your church is wanting to do that well. So I just want to give you 3 projects that I think might illustrate some of the things we'll talk about. So back in 2017, I bought worship.ai and made this first little worship lyric generator that I thought was the coolest thing in the world. And what it does is it just has 3 input sources. So you can either give it the Psalms, you can give it a bunch of modern worship music or, up to 2017, and then some old hymns, and you see what it'll generate coming back out. So if you want to try that, you can. This is sort of old school tech now at this point, and you heard earlier how advanced it's come. The lyrics are better. It can generate music. It can generate the lyrics. But this is a first experiment of really, what we train it with is what will come back out. So I've been playing around with these things for a little while. Another project that isn't quite so related was when I was in seminary, I would often ask professors, what's the best commentary on Esther, on Mark, or on Romans? You guys are going through Romans right now. And they would give me all these lists. And me as a programmer, I thought, man, I could aggregate all these lists together and make sort of like a Rotten Tomatoes for commentaries. And so I built this thing. And then it was not until years later that I realized that a lot of the data is, 70s professors and their views and who was in seminary at the time and who was allowed to go to seminary. And that's all changed. And so really there's a lot of algorithmic and data bias built into this site. And so I started to think about, what's my responsibility as a guy that has a website that 1 million Christians hit a year? What do I do with this? And so I've been thinking about, what are the ethics behind that? And then one of my favorite projects is y'allversion.com. So you probably use YouVersion, but one of the things that you learn if you get to go to seminary is that every language in the world has a different word for you singular and you plural, except for modern English. And so I thought, we've got to fix the Bible. And so y'allversion goes in all those places. I mean, it ruins the favorite verse that we all give our kids when they graduate from high school and college, but it's, I know the plans I have for y'all, is what it actually says. So if you're interested in second person plurals, that's a little bit more manual, a little less AI, but you get the picture. I do love both talking about these things, but also trying to create and hopefully create things that have value, that help people out, that get them closer to their faith and even are useful to them. So that's me. Now, how about you? You saw some stats on earlier, but I'm going to put them together of just your experience with AI. So what we saw is that about maybe, something like 40% haven't used this at all. Maybe 40% are casual, have dabbled, but another 20% of you are real experts. You know what you're doing. So I'm going to try to kind of skirt right in the middle there and hit a little bit of all those things, but do some introductory material as well as some things that hopefully everybody will like. And that's sort of your use, but what do you think about it? And so I noticed that there was a really interesting spectrum of thoughts. So if you look at this, there's a fair amount of people that were positive, maybe 20% positive for me, 20% positive for society, maybe a little no impact, but there's a lot of you that are worried about negative impact on society. And I think that you're right. There is always, when there's technological change, there are hard things. They're kind of a mix of good things and bad things that we're going to navigate, and it's always unevenly distributed. So I don't take this as all good or all bad, but just we're wrestling with this. We're in a place where it's not all clear where we're going to go. And nationally, we see some similar things. So Gallup did some polls recently, and they asked people at work, how often do you use AI? It turns out that, about 2/3 of people aren't using AI at all, and the other third are using it just very sporadically, except for a little group of 5 or 6% that are really using this on a real daily basis. So even that this audience has a maybe 10, 15%, you're probably over-indexed in the sense of what type of jobs you're using and how often you're using this. And they also ask, what kind of things you're using it for. We don't need to look at this in detail, but you notice a lot of people are generating ideas. They're getting text. They're doing some things with coworkers, some things with their equipment. I do find that one at the top there, though, of automating basic tasks to be a real shift in the way people are doing work. So you're seeing a lot of experimentation, and this has all been happening in the last couple of years. At DTS, we had a fun project yesterday. We just had our 100th year anniversary at Dallas Theological Seminary. So that was a big celebration for us. This is our founder, Louis Sperry Chafer. And what we decided to do was see if we could find somebody who looked just enough like him that we could deep fake him. And so this is my colleague, Luke Spencer. And so we worked on some deep fake stuff for him. And then there's now a new museum. And you can see here that they did a pretty good job with getting him. And this doesn't have any audio. You can just kind of see these actors that we sort of put on historical figures from the school's past, and they all end up talking to one another. So there's really fun stuff there to see the cool stuff that you can do with technology. On the other hand, here's a recent CNN report. As you guys know, there's something coming up next week, just another event. This is the big event for right now, but there's another smaller event next week, and this is a little report that CNN did. We'll just play a short clip of this. Oops, let me go back and see if it'll play. So this is Jake Tapper talking about, elections and what's going on in the U.S. and how there's a lot of concerns about, you've probably seen some stories about, some AI technology being used to, deep fake an ad or something like that. And so what he ends up doing, though, here is showing you that this is not actually him talking. This is a deep fake of himself talking about the news. So, you're seeing a lot of this out there. I don't think we've seen the real giant watershed event yet, but I think there is a lot going on. We know this has been happening for the last decade or two. And then there's some really sad stuff out there. This is probably the first teenage kid who got involved with character.ai, which is a chatbot where you can pick some famous characters. He picked someone from a Game of Thrones, one of those blonde ladies, I think. I've never seen the show, but anyway, he really got attached to her and couldn't find that connection and ended up committing suicide, and so his parents are suing. So there's a lot of really neat, cool, amazing stuff, and then some really painful things that are happening out there. So here's what we're gonna try to do. I'm gonna try to just give you an overview of AIs, a little bit of how it works, try to just present something about a little bit more detail than just examples. And then we'll actually look at some good examples and some bad examples. What are some cool things that you might be able to do, and then start to address some of the concerns that people have about AI and that we specifically have as believers, and we'll do that toward the end in terms of a way of thinking about things theologically. So let's think a little bit about just our overall approach. Here's what I'm going to try to do. On one hand, I want us to be hopeful. I want us to go, there are a lot of benefits out there to the things that people make, and I think God has enabled us to make things, and we want to be hopeful about those benefits. At the same time, we also want to be honest about ourselves, that we're not always that great at handling new things. And so we just want to be honest about, our own proclivities as individuals, what Paul calls the flesh, that incurvature toward the self that we all have. And then also as a society, there's going to be a lot of struggles there. And taking this idea that whenever there's some new technological power, whether this was the industrial age or the computer age or now the AI age, that with every new technological power, there's this new need for discipline that we all have. Because once you have unlimited food, now you need to kind of regulate that input. And once you have unlimited travel, now you need to actually exercise. And we're going to start having the same thing. Once we have this unlimited mental power, what do we do with our own minds? That's the direction that we're going to be going. But we want to be hopeful, but we also want to be honest and realistic. So when you think about AI, here's just a simple definition. It enables machines to mimic human cognitive functions. So we've had machines that can do human physical function for a long time. That's been the last couple hundred years. But now we're starting to see machines that can do some of the things that we did mentally. And the things that we thought a machine could never do, they easily do, often better than we do. So when you think about a timeline, the big thing that really kicked this off, of course, was almost exactly 2 years ago, OpenAI released their ChatGPT platform. That was the thing that everybody could go in and try for the first time and really experience something that they hadn't seen before. But this has been going on for a long time. So if we go way back to the 50s, Alan Turing, the one that broke a lot of the codes in World War II, he came up with this idea of if you could be chatting with something and you couldn't tell if it was a person or a machine, that's when we've really arrived at this special point. And you can see this little span here, we've basically gotten to that point where machines are now passing the Turing test. And it wasn't until a couple years later that an American computer scientist, John McCarthy, came up with the term artificial intelligence. And notice this, man, we've been talking about this for a long time. It's almost 75 years now. So this has been going on for a while. And a lot of thinkers have devoted time to this, waiting for this moment that we're now in. If I think back at some of the inventions and things, something like anti-lock brakes could be considered a form of AI. It does something, it senses something and does something for us. So when you slam on the brakes, but it senses that you're sliding, it does something like by AI breaking and unbreaking really, really fast. So there's been some machine learning and things that have been going on behind the scenes for a while. And then, as things went on, this started to enter into the cultural zeitgeist, that depending on your age, this was probably the first big thing, that there were Isaac Asimov novels and all that, but this was the big blockbuster thing that everybody knew. What if we train them and they get so good that they hate us and they take over? And so this has been that underlying fear. And yet as things go along, we start with new inventions. We find things that we thought could never happen. Humans are always going to be better at complex things like chess. Well, it turns out we're really not. And so these machines have been doing better than this, and this is now, almost 30 years ago. And we start using things like Google Maps that was way better than what we had before. And we start, talking to machines a little over 10 years ago with Alexa and Siri. And then, this new term, generative AI, comes out a little bit about 10 years ago. This thought that instead of just being able to do things for us, we'd actually be able to have it spit something back out. It can't just analyze, but it could produce something. And so OpenAI started with their big mission to say, we want to get to this sort of general intelligence before anybody else. So we're going to do it in an open way. We're going to do it in a nonprofit way. So they start releasing different tools, and a lot of companies are using these things, but it's 4 years later when they release it to the public. And so now we're seeing, new releases every day. So it's been going on for a while, but now it's speeding up and getting a lot faster. So I'm going to just give you a couple of examples you already know of the things that we're already using a lot of AI. We're using it when we use our maps. We're using it when we do spell check. We're using it when we speak to all of our different devices around our home. We're using it again when we drive. Almost anything in our car has that kinds of AI in it. And yet we're also seeing, the downside of these things. So we're seeing, a pull toward a screen, that it's not just the content on the screen, but it's specifically designed to pull us in and keep us in. And then as we are consuming things and think that we're great researchers and we've found something great, we're finding that we're in these little filter bubbles that each of us have a set of content that's been curated just for us to keep us going, to keep us clicking. And so we're further and further apart, politically and sociologically than we have ever been as a country as we find ourselves in these little holes. There's a lot of concern about, particularly for women, of people, doing the fun deep space stuff, but not in very fun ways, and abusing bodies and moving faces on them in ways that aren't helpful. And then there's a whole lot of surveillance from companies, from governments. There's all kinds of military concerns. So there's a lot of really neat things that we're already doing, but there's also a lot of things that are in the background that aren't so helpful. And so I think if you feel like you are if you are in that novice category, you're really not, right? So all of us, what we want to know is AI is everywhere, and we're already doing it. So instead of kind of thinking of yourself as a casual user, know that compared to someone 10 years or 20 years ago, you're very advanced, all of you. So give yourselves an applause. You're all very, very high-tech people. You may just not know it. So if I get a little bit more technical on some of the things about how AI works, there's kind of old school AI where a program would go in and give a set of instructions to a machine. This is in a sense how your thermostat works, that it senses temperature and it just turns on or off, like the things that are at your hotel, those big boxes that just either blow air or not. And then, it gets a little bit better where it's able to understand more data and able to look at broad spectrum. So your newer thermostats that are able to, sense when you're home and predict when to turn it on and off, those things are a little bit more advanced. And then finally, after analyzing all that data statistically, then able to say, now what do I output? And that's where we are now, is with this generative AI phenomenon that really is much more interesting and interactive. And I think that's why it's captured our imagination. Even though we've had all kinds of AI for a while, this generative stuff really feels closer to what we do and think of as unique to being humans. And this is why I think it's both this excitement, but also such a big threat. So when we think about programming, if you've ever did any programming, it looks something like this. You give it a time and you compare and you give it if-then statements and you tell it what to output. And there's things like you can do little loops and you can make it say things over and over again. And this is what's been going on for 50, 60, 70 years. And what runs all of our banking systems, this is just basic programming. It's a kind of artificial intelligence, but not in the way that we think about it today. And then, as we went along with different AI, there's this more discriminative version that's able to look at large, complex sets of data and be able to see things that just if and then statements couldn't do. So when you give it a bunch of different pictures, it's eventually able to, make out what a face is. And so, it takes a ton of data, and it takes the right kind of diverse data. Early on, Asian scientists and sort of Silicon Valley scientists gave them people who looked like them, and it failed on people who didn't look like them. But as the data gets better and better, this is is a good reminder that whatever AI you're using today is the worst one you'll ever use. It's just gonna keep getting better and better and better. So it gets better every time you have a data set. It's able to not identify faces, but identify all the different things in the scenes with different weights. And as it gets better, we continue to see more and more benefits. But when you think about all these terms like GPT and LLM, I wanna try to give you one little really simplified illustration of how this is working. So I'm gonna give you some training data, and I wanna train you all as an audience, okay? So look up here, and I want you to just read this little, read these sentences just for a second. Just read them, take it all in, process it, develop it in your mind. Okay, you've got all the word frequencies, you got it all down, everybody? Thumbs up? Okay, good. So you've got this in here. Now let's say someone had said the word the. What's the next most likely word after the? Somebody shout it out. Cat? Okay, so you've got a couple different words, and you guys got it right that cat was the most likely term. So the computer, when it's learning, it's going through and it's giving a statistical weight to each of the pieces of data that it comes along. Now, you've got these different words here, cat, dog, and turtle. What are the next most likely terms for each of those? Drink, anything else? Yeah, so all these terms, and you've got a weight on all of those. So if you, kind of on your text message, if you were to type in the, what it's doing is it's weighing all the things that are most likely, kind of broadly, of the things that it's read, and it's also looking at your own text patterns of what types of things do you talk about, and it's trying to figure out what is the next most likely thing. And this was the oldest form of this type of technology. In fact, a Russian scientist by the last name Markov invented this in the late 1800s. So he came up with this whole statistical model of analyzing text, but he all did it by hand. And so the earliest, large language models were able to take that, what an individual human would do, and make it very, very large with millions and millions and millions of things. Now, if you look at this and you think about if it went to cat, notice that there's at least one wrong possibility, right? What's the wrong possibility? Bark. Yeah, that's the wrong possibility. And this is where we talk about, AI doing something like a hallucination, where there's a statistical probability that this piece of text should be there, but it actually shouldn't be there. And so as these large language models ingest all this data, then a company will have it do a bunch of different outputs. And then whenever it gets something wrong, they'll go in and re-weight that a little bit. So this is what this pre-trained idea of a transformer that has some data on it. So someone's gonna go in and add this additional data to it and say, these three are valid, and something like this one isn't valid. And as more of that data of what it found in the original data and what it constructed, and then that additional input on the other side, when you use ChatGPT and it generates something and you say you don't like it, each of those is sort of doing the same thing here and building a tree of more complex information. So again, right now, the way these things are working is that they're not necessarily developing a model of the world in the way that you and I think about a model of the world. And yet, this simplified version is kind of 3 and 4 dimensional. And so there really are a lot of associations in the same way that we develop conceptually our own senses of what animals are and what people are and all of those things. They're developing some sense of that. And the more corrective it gets, the better. It does seem like we're starting to get to some limitations on our language model as we read everything that humans have ever done. And when there's a lot of Reddit in there, it seems like it runs into some problems. But for the most part, we're training, we're getting better. And then not only is this happening in text, this is also the same way that, say, something like your mapping software works, that the most likely set of and the most easiest path goes through there. This is how a lot of our technology is working, is through some type of neural network like this. And you can see how fast this is developing, that when that term generative AI came out, the early question was, is this art when it generates an image? Because everything that was coming out was more abstract like this. It wasn't terribly realistic. And then a little bit later, they started getting better and better and better. Then they started doing video, and there was this famous Will Smith eating spaghetti video that was really horrifically terrible, but just genuinely interesting that they had moved from bad images to good images to bad video. And then just a few months ago, this is a totally AI-generated image of a kind of a TED Talk speaker, and it's amazing. It looks so good, and these things are developing incredibly fast. But all of this is sort of based on probability, and you see there at the end that maybe her mouth looks a teeny bit misshapen there at the end, but there's no extra finger. There's none of those early signs of AI, so it's doing really, really well. So as this develops really, really quickly, we begin to talk about where are we going next and where is the future. So when we think about these different models for what AI might be, one of them, the most simple one is narrow AI or some type of limited AI where it's really good at doing something like a calculator, again, like anti-lock brakes, mapping. These are really good at specific tasks and often much, much better than a human is. But yet, Google Maps can't do your taxes and they can't do multiple things. So what we're hoping to do is to develop far enough along where we could develop some type of system that could be almost as good as a human at everything. And so this would be this idea of artificial general intelligence, or AGI. So we try to get things to where it's very general purpose. It's not just about mapping, not just about statistics, but really you can ask or answer any question and it can help you in any way. And then the thought is, of course, that if this continues, if we were able to build a machine that was as smart as us, maybe it could develop a machine that's smarter than it. And then we start to even accelerate more and faster. And this is where we get to artificial superintelligence. And sometimes people talk about this idea of a singularity happening, where once that hits, all of a sudden we start to skyrocket into a different place because all of human knowledge has gotten us here. But if we can do something better than all human knowledge put together, then maybe something else will happen. I don't know that that's really going to happen anytime soon. Scientists vary on whether or not they think that's 5 years, 50 years, or 500 years away. I'm not sure we can really know, but I don't personally think this is coming anytime really soon. But this is the direction. Where most scientists are focused is in this middle area of, can we get to some type of general intelligence? And can we define this? So OpenAI later on this summer, they came up with their definition of 5 stages, and the 5th stage is when they think they will have achieved something like what they would call general intelligence. So the first step is what we're all experiencing now, chatbots that can beat the Turing test. They're smarter and better that you can't tell if it's a robot usually until you get pretty far down a conversation. So that's where we are now. The next 2 stages are what's being developed at this moment. So the next one would be, instead of just you typing in a prompt and it just dumping it all out at once, that it's actually breaking it down into discrete rational tasks and really thinking in the type of way that a human does, where it's breaking apart ideas. And you're starting to see some of the newer models getting closer to that. And the next thing would be to actually have the AI do something. So if you think about filing your taxes, if you could just hand it all the papers and just say, do it, and it could figure out TurboTax or the government website or whatever, it could actually figure out those websites. That would be the really next big step, not just to generate something, but to actually do something and do things that are really useful to people. There's some level of this happening right now, but OpenAI wouldn't kind of consider themselves or us broadly to be at a place where that's really fully and robustly developed. So the next stage that we're not at is where we're really saying, man, this is good enough to come up with a really original idea. Not just typing into a prompt, give me 5 subject lines for an email. This is saying, let's come up with something really, really original where this is a full member of my team. So 1, 2, 3, AI is kind of like alongside you. It's a partner, it's a tool, but this would really be a full-on employee of a company. And then when they would consider AGI is when it could really take over an entire company, where every single worker would be unnecessary except maybe the owner, and that it could do everything that a company could do. And this is where what they're trying to achieve with AGI. Now, part of the reason why this is important is that they just came out with OpenAI just came out with their reasoning module last month, and then Anthropic with their Claude came out with what they call computer use, which is that middle agent one. So we're moving really, really fast. But there's a big reason for them to make their own definition of AGI. And this is really inside baseball, but this is Sam Altman, the founder or the CEO right now of OpenAI. He's looking to take OpenAI from being a nonprofit company to being a for-profit company. And he's talking about the sky and constellations. What he means is we're at ChatGPT 4.0 right now. The 5.0 is named Orion, and so he's hinting that this is coming in the month when Orion is most visible from where he's living. So it's getting that weird, the discussion out there in terms of what's coming next. But the reason why this is important is they have a humongous contract with Microsoft. So if you know anything about OpenAI and Microsoft and Copilot, these are all deeply interwoven. The weird thing about their contract is the contract says that when OpenAI achieves AGI, then Microsoft loses all access to it. Does that make sense? So if they get there, and if AGI is defined by OpenAI, they can say it whenever they want and cut out Microsoft. So man, it is a battle out there. These are big partners, lots of money, lots of things going on. So that's sort of the what's going on in Silicon Valley. Let's talk about some actual real world uses. What can we get out of this? What would help us flourish? And then we'll talk about the bad stuff. But here's some of the fun stuff. If you're a coder and you've looked up things before, you always have to look up and you go to Stack Overflow. Now, I think generative AI is so much better at that. If you're doing things like trying to analyze data and you're writing your own code for that, this goes a lot faster. If you're doing things like, hopefully the transportation is getting better, we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then there's all kinds of fun things in the medical field, in marketing, of being able to have custom products and see what something would look like on you. And then there's some real negative things, of course, in education, but there's some real positive things about being able to develop custom bots off of material and have students really be able to have good, safe feedback where they won't get made fun of in a class or won't have difficulty with a teacher. So there's a lot of really positive things. So let's start with the self-driving car thing. I have a son who's about to turn 16 next week. And when he was a little kid, I used to tell him, I bet you're never going to get a driver's license because you're going to have a robot car. So he grew up thinking he was going to get a robot car, and we were so disappointed that these things did not materialize. There's a whole spectrum of usage here. So the first one, it goes 0 through 5, and we're probably in the 2 and 3 range right now instead of at the 4 and 5 where we thought we might be at this point. But level 0 is the old school car that doesn't really have anything. Level 1 is something like a more adaptive cruise control or lane assist or something like that, where you notice the little guy here, he has his foot off the pedal there, and so he's able to have at least one thing taken care of. And then the level 2 is where you've got multiple things going on. So he's got now his hands off and his feet off. He still needs to be attentive. If you have a car that maybe has like lane assist and adaptive speed, that it'll let you take your hands off for a second or two, but it's going to get mad at you real fast. That's where a lot of cars are now. And then you're starting to see something like this where there is a place where you could look away for a while. This is about where Tesla seems like they are right now. It's pretty amazing that it can drive you around, but it does make enough mistakes. It may actually be better than a human driver, but it makes enough mistakes right now that we're not really calling it what it's sold as, which is full self-driving. And that would be this next stage where you really can fall asleep, take a nap. You've got the Z's up there that you don't need to do anything, and we're not there yet. We're getting close, but it seems like this is a much harder problem, that some of the things that humans can do are really hard for machines still to do and to react to all the situations. This would be the next stage where in a limited state, like where there's really good data, really good information, that it's really well known that this would be safe. And then the final stage would be it could drive anywhere at any time, and maybe there wouldn't even be a steering wheel at all in the machines. So you're seeing a few companies experiment with this. What seems like it's going to happen is that there will be more and more specific things as for small cases we go from 3 to 4. For example, food delivery and local couriers and things like that. Or maybe driving on a long distance highway where a truck might be totally autonomous all the way until it gets into a city, and then a remote driver would take over remotely because that area was more difficult. So you're seeing that this isn't an all or nothing thing like we thought it was going to go from nothing to full self-driving. It seems like most of our AI experiences are going to be more in this spectrum, and that they'll start in particular industries. But what we need to be aware of is that when this does come, the largest single job sector in America is transportation. This will eventually affect our friends and people who have jobs in these industries. There's some other really neat things out there. People are experimenting with things like nurse training. So there's been robotic training for a long time, and now there's VR and AI simulation. The robotic training is great, but it does require that you have a big group of people, so you can't do it individually. It does require that you get that physical experience, which is really obviously great for nurses and doctors, but it's pretty expensive, and it requires staff and maintenance. So VR is a lot cheaper, and it allows you to have this really quick individual feedback that as soon as you make a mistake, it can reset immediately. You don't have to put the fluids back in the robot. It can just start over again. So that's really good. And it seems like people who are a little bit more worried about what fellow students are going to think, those are maybe a little more introverted or coming back to school, they really benefit. On the other hand, if you are wanting to do any sort of pastoral care with it, you're really limited to what this software company has in it. And so you're not able to really customize it to your own. So there's some neat things out there that are augmenting existing education and making it better and richer by allowing people to experience things. I want to try one more audio thing if audio works, and if it doesn't, that is great. But, oh, here we go. So this is me reading a verse.
Mateo 20, 818 y 19. Jesús se acercó y dijo, se me ha dado toda autoridad en el cielo y en la tierra.
Now, you might not be able to tell there is that it hasn't just translated my voice, so it translated the text, then adapted my voice, but it also did a pretty good job with my lips. It's a little out of sync in here in the room, but it's amazing. So I have it doing it in Spanish and in Chinese and in Hindi. And so we're looking at our online education as a seminary and thinking, wow, we could actually do some things that we couldn't do before. Now, we don't want to replace an entire class with a professor speaking like this, but we do want to do some special augmented videos this way. And so I think you're seeing a lot of ministries look at maybe even their live streaming services, thinking about translation in a different way. And so there's some really, really powerful tools coming out there. For other ministry-oriented situations, Logos Bible Software has come up with a bunch of new tools, and they are really heavily touting their AI, and yet at the same time, they're saying, hey, we still don't want you to write a sermon with this, but we do want it to augment what you're doing. So there's a lot of discussion out there about, should your pastor write their sermons? Should this entire presentation have been AI generated instead of me doing anything on myself? There are some companies like Pulpit.ai is saying, hey, this is really about the post-production. So they're trying to take small churches that don't have big staffs like you have here. And they'll say, hey, we can record this, we can chop it up into shareable bits, we can also generate questions for small groups. And for that single pastor that most churches in America are 100 people or less, this is able to give them to reuse their content in ways that are really helpful, that enrich their community, not generating stuff, but doing post-production. And then we're seeing, in all types of industry, the ability to practice things that you couldn't practice before. So we saw nursing before, but there's a lot of different counseling scenarios where you could practice that. There's negotiation techniques that you could do, trying to get the best deal out of somebody. So there's a lot of different layers here of tools that are interactive that can simulate something that you would do in real life. And then those that might be, say, in a therapy session, there's a lot of good note-taking systems out there that can help summarize and help you focus on your client while you're talking to them. And there's some therapists that really feel like that tactile sense of writing is really important to them. And the actual act of writing is a way of understanding what's happening. And so they don't prefer that type of tool, but then those that aren't quite as robustly skilled in that area are finding this is really good for them. There's all kinds of great stuff of fraud detection. There are, though, at the same time of fraud detection, there's a whole industry out there of education changing. There's write A+ essays in less time. And so you've seen people saying, hey, I've got 2 kids in college. They never go to class, and they're still getting 90%. What's going on with university education? And so as educators, we're trying to think, how do we continue to help form our kids? And so this brings us to some of the AI concerns that are out there. So my little robot friend is now going to turn his eyes red. And so we're going to bring up some of the issues that we're all concerned with before we get into some of the theological ways of thinking about this. So some of the things you've heard of the inaccuracies. Again, this is early nascent technology. It's immediately getting better. And so a lot of these inaccuracies are getting taken care of. And yet, as a society, I think we're getting closer to where we don't care as much, unfortunately. And so we're being inculcated into those patterns. There's a lot of biases in there. There's as much attempts to correct, and sometimes they overcorrect in directions, and then those will show up online, and they correct back. So we're still in a stage of working on these things, but they are getting better. Even if those are all corrected, we still have the issue of where did the data come from, and was it properly sourced, and did someone actually have access to that, or did they do something under the hood? So there's a lot of lawsuits out there that are currently happening. And then when it comes to the other side of it, do I consent to you using the video that's being recorded right now and doing something with it? Now, I did sign away a document here, but not all of us have signed up to those types of things. And then finally, right now it looks like about 4% of the world's energy is being taken up just by AI. Not any other technology, but these large language models, processing them and running them, it's going to get to about 10%. So we think about all the people that die of various things that need some type of power, and we're using it to generate cute images and make funny songs and stuff like that. This is, I think, an incredible ethical issue for us to all to be considering how we're using our energy. And we just think about humans, just different people, all kinds of businesses. They're thinking, I want to do things the right way, but then their competitor isn't, and so they're going after it, and they're cutting little corners in here, and they're battling for this. We think about all of our society, just when we can't trust anything, then we don't have a lot of cohesion, and so we're probably more disconnected and more frustrated and anxious than we've ever been. We think about, again, we talked about cars earlier, about as soon as a job comes along, or as soon as a new AI tool comes along, we're seeing people losing their jobs. And just all of us, as we develop more deeper relationships with our technology, are we developing relationships with each other? Pastors, are trying to be authentic both ways, both in terms of, how they generate their content and who they are to you. And we could make a bot of our pastor, but is that really what we want? Is that what we need at the deepest level? And finally, for our students, as they have all this incredible technology, but not a lot of guidance of how to do this, who are they becoming? They've got to go to school. So how are they going to become the type of person that can carry on society? There's a couple of other big scale worries that we see. This is from the Center for AI Safety. They have 4 big worries in their toolbox. So one of them is just people actually intentionally using things wrong, bioterrorism, all those worries. So those are the direct and explicit threats. But then there's a bunch of implicit ones, like, for example, just again, all these companies battling it out, that there's always attempts to cut short things and to go around and try to do it a little bit faster. So it looks like that's what is happening in OpenAI. That's why Sam Altman got fired and pulled back in, is questions about whether or not they're doing things the right way. And even though they're going after these things, there's some level of accidents that can happen. So there's the famous sort of paperclip problem of telling an AI to make the best paperclip, and it decides the best way to do that is to kill all the people. It was an accident, but that's the most efficient way to make paperclips. And so hopefully nothing quite like that will happen, but there are always some possibility of accidents when we see new tools being released and being manipulated. And then finally, the last one is just if an AI ever does go out and does go rogue in that accidental way. So there's a lot of different control structures built in, but these are the types of things that lots of organizations are thinking through. And I hope those of you who are in these industries are speaking into them as Christians. And then finally, I just think as we think about our own, media usage, we have these things that take time, like a very beautiful piece of art. Does anybody know who this is? Gustav Klimt, yeah, it's a beautiful piece and just really invites contemplation. So art, I think, requires some level of effort. It's not just to look at and run away. It invites something. But we're awash in entertainment, and I love a good Marvel movie like anybody else, but this is just kind of what we want to see. It's the lowest common denominator. And so that's going to always, entertainment's going to always eat art. And we're at this point now where we're seeing that distraction is eating entertainment, and it's just going faster and faster and faster, and there's this kind of just eating consumption of all of culture and all of life happening. And so we don't need to go through all of this, but there is this movement and sense that we're moving away from things like playing a sport to watching a sport to gambling on a sport. That becomes the next thing. And so we can move along on this on, really every facet of life. We are going faster and faster and faster and faster and faster and less in the deep contemplative life that we all really long for, but we find ourselves drawn into these more dopamine culture type things. And these are all empowered by various AI systems that are figuring out what has the most pull on you, and you can then hopefully resist. But you are not just resisting a minor temptation, you're resisting multi-billion-dollar companies that make all their money on getting you to be pulled in. So we're in a really, really challenging environment. And I'll mention, as we move into the future, I think this is all what's happening on our screens. But we're moving to a place where some of these types of technologies will become embodied. And I have an image up here that I don't mean to be overly provocative, but I do just want to point out that we're moving into an era where our own sexuality is being quite challenged, and yet also we're often sexualizing people. And not just in this way that you see in this sort of provocative way of an image, but you also see a lot of the bias built into us in terms of what bodies should look like. There's also seems to be a big bias toward white robots over black robots. So a lot of that implicit bias that people still have are even being applied into the robot space. And probably the first big area that robotic devices would be useful for would be something like medical care, and particularly elder care. And as we want to have dignified lives as we age. And as I'm in that stage where I'm in the sandwich generation of caring for my parents and caring for my kids. I want to care for my parents well, and I want my kids to care for me well. I don't want them to just stick me with a robot. But this is probably one of the first areas that we'll have. And so this is a lot of the emotional labor that we might be ceded over to robots. So there's a variety of concerns that we have here. And what I want to do for the next little bit here is just think a little bit theologically about how do we look at the story of God? How do we look at it deeply and say, what can we draw out that would help us guide us in this moment? So I want to look at the biblical story in 5 big things. I've got a little icon for each one that's a kind of tech infused. So with creation, we've got a little on button. With the fall, we have, you can all guess, Apple, right? When we think about the Old Testament and all of the law, of course, we're going to have our tablets there. And then when we think about Christ bringing redemption, he's going to save us. We got the save icon there. And then, of course, we have the end. Our goal is to move from the garden to the city, so we have the city. So let's start with creation here and just make some observations about what we see. The first thing we see about God, the first thing we know about him is that he is a creator God. And then he immediately comes along and says, humankind, I'm going to create you in my image, male and female, that we all bear the image of God. Every person in this room, regardless of ability, this is where we get our dignity. And we go, well, what in the world does the image of God mean? And you get some hint, when Jesus is talking, he says, whose image is on this coin? Whose inscription? You can see Caesar is on there. And so it's this representation of Caesar out in the world, that he's everywhere in a sense through these coins. And so this is what we think some of what the idea of the image of God means, is that we are God's representatives in the world. There's been a couple of different theories of how the image of God works. So the earliest one was something like that we call a functional image of God, where we were thinking that primarily our image of God was in our unique rational ability, that we were rational animals. And so we get this from Plato and Aristotle. Then the Christian tradition picks this up. And really for about 1700 years, this was the dominant position, is that we in our rational minds are special. Something about us physically is just unique to all animals. When we start to realize that scientifically we're not that different than animals in terms of our structure and our DNA, and we look at that animals are able to do a lot of the same stuff as us, this view got challenged a little bit. And it's also a little bit challenging when we have someone who maybe is disabled or differently abled or born with some type of disability, and we say, do they have the image of God if they can't do all of those things? And we want to come up with a way of thinking about the image of God that isn't relying purely on function or substance. And so we look at this new model called the functional model, but this isn't just a doing. This is really fulfilling that command to have dominion over all of creation. So it's really more of a role that we have together and our creative calling to care for and cultivate the earth. But then, people started to think, maybe it is more of our relationship with God. How do we have this unique connection with one another, but also with God? Animals certainly react in relational ways, but they don't have this special relationship with God. And then finally, what we call the existential or eschatological model, this longing for God that we seem to have in a unique way that the rest of creation doesn't. Paul will say that all creation longs for resurrection, but not in the same way that we do. So if you look at all these kind of models, you put it together and you realize, if we conceive of AI in particular ways, it could take over all of these things. If our model is just functional in the sense that we're supposed to do something for creation, then it looks like AI could probably do that, or some machine will eventually be able to do that better than us. It's certainly better than us at the rational things at some point. It would be better than us in the physical way. And yet when we think about these relational categories, we go, I don't think it can ever have that same type of relationship that we have with God. God has chosen us to be his image bearers in a unique way. So that even if you had a robot who had some longing to find its creator, like this existential model, it still doesn't have that unique choice of God. That is, regardless of whatever we do, we just have this stamp of him on us, and we're representative of him. And so our calling that we see in Genesis is to work the garden and to take care of it. But the fascinating thing about these two verbs is that this working idea has the idea of cultivating or tool usage. So making tools is part of what it means to be human. And it does just take care of it or guard or preserve. This is what a soldier would do over a tower, to look out and to guard the city. But there's some part of us that's called to not only take us into a direction toward the city, moving from the garden to the city, but we're also called to preserve something of the natural world. And I think as we're developing new technologies, we want to think, what is it about us that we want to preserve? This is part of our original calling, is to care for creation, but also to care for us as creations, and to think about how we hold those together. So that's the good part. Then we move into the fall. And in this moment, the promise of the serpent is, one, that you'll escape death, and two, that you can be like God. And so, we were given this idea of being made in God's likeness, but we continue to seek after what I would call godlikeness, that our human dignity comes from our status as image bearers, and yet we're constantly looking to evolve past that. We're trying to get past that and go further and further and further. So in the fall, though, we see this really special moment where as soon as Adam and Eve sin, as soon as they realize they're naked, they immediately do something, they create something. And when God comes to curse the world, to say, here are the consequences of sin, and gives that little promise of a savior coming in the future, when he looks at their act of making, This is the one thing that he seems to affirm. He seems to come along and say, they made something, well, I'm gonna come and I'm gonna make them something better. This is like the world's first free tech upgrade where someone comes along and shows them how to do something better. And yet we see there's all this theological meaning in here about they're trying to cover their own sin, and God is saying, I'm gonna have to sacrifice something, something's gonna have to die, so it looks forward to Christ. And so we see that our technology always has some meaning built into it, that it always is deeper than just its function, but it has some representative power to us. And so the things that we continue to use do that. So if we move along into the story, into God redeeming people through Israel, we see how important all this is, just even in the 10 Commandments. The first commandment is no other gods before me. The next commandment is how we use technology to represent God. It says, don't make any other images of God. So this is a technological way of reinforcing the theology of the first point. Well, we are in God's image, and we do not need to make images of him. And so this constant command over in the Old Testament is just things like this about, are you gonna make an image like him? Who can you compare to God? And so all throughout Isaiah, we see these statements about making idols and saying, they don't do anything for you, but they do seem to sometimes offer a sense of short-term gain. What we're supposed to do, the model of our reality, is that we're supposed to be made in the image of God, and then we become to represent him over all creation, like the coin of Caesar was. But we have two problems about what we tend to do as we move backward. We tend to, one, make God in our own image and seek for some type of short-term gain through an idol. But the thing that I think is happening to us more now is less this part, and more that we begin to look at our machines and we begin to think about humans according to machines. So we begin to value people in terms of, are they as good as machines? And so if someone isn't as physically strong or as mentally able, then we begin to think of them as subhumans, and we begin to think of them as less worthy and less worthy of our own dignity and respect. And so this is why the image of God concept is so important to us, that we say we have this unique relationship that machines won't have. Machines will get really, really good, but they won't have this part, and they will never be God's immediate representative ruler over all of creation. But AI is one of the tools that we're going to use to fulfill our creative calling, our culture mandate to take care of this earth. But we want to be careful that we're not having it replace humanity or our conception of humanity, and that we're not just using it for short-term gain as we think about who we want to become in the long term. So our real risk, I don't think, is Terminator scenarios. It's really the other way around, that we start to value, we need to be like the Terminators, that we start to make ourselves in the image of the thing that we make. And so we say sometimes that we become what we behold. The things that we're around, the friends that we're around, we become like them. And the more we're around the machines that we make, we want to become like those machines. And so we want to surround ourselves with people that do things the way that we want to do. And I think we just want to reiterate this, that our human consciousness and our soul is not reducible to bytes. We can't upload our whole self onto a machine. And this doesn't in any way, stop development. We can still hold to this view of humanity while still going forward technologically. The neat thing about the Old Testament is there's little fun hints at the way that we should do technology today. So one of my favorite little ones comes in Deuteronomy. It says, when you build a house, you shall make a parapet for your roof, so that you don't bring the guilt of blood upon your house if anyone should fall from it. So you may be asking what this is about. So here's an AI-generated image of a first-century house, and it has this roof up top. And if you notice, it's flat, so you could fall off that roof. So the parapet is this little part along the top that helps you to not fall off there. What I think this is, what I love about this passage is that I think it gives you three really simple rules for the way that we should interact with technology. The first one is that we should build stuff. That this doesn't say if you build or if you have to build, it just says when you build. The expectation is that you as humans are gonna work, that work is good, and that building is good. But what you're gonna build is a house. You're gonna build things for flourishing. You are, again, like we say here, made to flourish. So we're not doing casinos, we're building things that are built for human flourishing. And yet, when you do this, you have an ethical responsibility to think about the safety systems around what you build. And so this parapet is the types of things that we need to do with our own AI work. So I love that the Old Testament has these random little notices here that are really applicable to us today. So we move on to Jesus, and what I think is wonderful about him is that he is the creator of all things, and yet the creation turns on him and rejects him. And yet even when he's on earth, that he has this role of being what we see in Scripture as a tectone, that we translate as carpenter. So this is the Greek word from which we get technology, is this artisan or craftsperson, someone who makes something with their hands, that even though he made the entire universe, that he's also a maker on earth. So he's the first Adam, or he's the second Adam, that he fulfills all the law, but he also fulfills just what it means to be human. And yet the technology with which he works is ultimately the technology on which he dies. That here we see that he was, the things that he worked on with his dad since he was a little kid, that this is here at the middle of the biblical story. What I love about this is I think God is telling us that he doesn't just want to destroy all the things that we've made, but he wants to continually be redeeming it. He's building it into the biblical story to say, guys, this stuff matters. It's not just a little side thing that you're doing. This is deeply part of what it means to be human. It's so deep that it's going to be, on the back of our PowerPoint slides and the top of our churches, the symbol of death that he's transformed into a symbol of life. So technology, I think, is deeply important to God. And as we think about what the New Testament authors are wrestling with, they're wrestling with, whether or not they should work with paper and ink, or whether or not they should go face to face in this first century house. They're not saying one is better than the other, but they're wrestling in community and saying, when is one technology appropriate and when should I do something in person? This goes all the way back to Genesis. When do I cultivate and when do I guard? And so we need the same wisdom and community to continue to be thinking about these things. When do I use technology like we're doing today? And when do I just need to be silent? And I just need to be more with God's creation? So there are all these questions that we continue to have. And as we get further into the chatbot world, we're asking questions about, can AI have empathy? I want to just give you an example of this. BibleChat.ai is a really neat tool for theology and asking great questions about if Adam and Eve had belly buttons and all that cool stuff that you can ask it. What are the 5 points of Calvinism? But what they found really quickly is that's not what people asked it. They didn't ask it that many those types of questions. They began to ask it about things like forgiveness. But what they're really asking is a deeper question. Does God want me to stay married to my husband after he committed adultery? This is the kinds of things that people are asking BibleChat.ai. And they're saying, what steps can I take to forgive my husband? And, what do I need to do with him? Do I still have an obligation to him? And ultimately, I think this person is asking, am I still valuable at the end of the day after all these things have happened? And people are now feeling like this is the best way to answer and to ask these types of questions because they feel so deeply alone. And so I think that the question about can AI have empathy is really maybe not in a real sense, but it probably feels more like this than what most Americans are experiencing in society. So if we think about where we are as a culture, we're seeing all this great, really terrible data about Americans and loneliness and those that don't have a close friend. There's good data out there that indicates that if you use a therapeutic chatbot, you actually do decrease your anxiety, decrease your depression. But the long-term studies really aren't there yet in terms of, does that really further you in some way? Does it get you above water so that you can re-engage, like sometimes medicine does? Or does it get you above water, but you never actually re-engage because you're engaging with a machine? And so there are some big, real issues about how many, especially men who are using chatbot-type girlfriends, about how abusive they're being, so they're training themselves in these negative ways. Some AIs have controls on them and don't allow you to do this, but there's a lot of unfettered AI out there that is really inculcating people in unhelpful patterns. And so this is all being done in secret, and so we want to expose this and pull this out. And so I think this is why the Bible is telling us, don't give up the habit of meeting together. Again, this house image keeps coming up that we've got to find face-to-face times to be together to overcome some of this. So we do look forward to the future of this future world where we're going to see the new heavens and the new earth, that everything will be recreated. There'll be a holy city. All of creation longs for redemption. But at the same time, we're sort of battling a world where we have our own sort of narrative of how the world works, of who we are and what the problem is and what the solution is and what are we looking for? We're looking for him to return. This is what we all long for. What we ultimately want is resurrection. But there is an alternative narrative out there that we really don't have any meaning, that the biggest issue for us is our physicality, and that hopefully one day we'll be able to, through some type of tool, the singularity, we'll be able to get past that and transcend all of us. This is the sort of worry that we saw right in the garden, is this escaping death and becoming like God. There's this alternative narrative that is out there that we need to continue to think about and to wonder through. And so I think as we get to this stage of saying, gosh, how do we look at the benefits without having some of this ability to not handle more power? I think what we need to do is just think about how this overabundance of technology that we have today, how that affects us and what it does to our ability to think. So let me just give you a couple of last examples here. When we look over the last couple hundred years, there's been incredible wonder that technology has brought. If you look at this, you see that 200 years ago, something like 90% of people were in poverty, 90% of people were illiterate. And so we've made great strides in this, but when we look at this extreme poverty, once we got to this point where we had enough food, now the obesity rate is going right up. We don't have this ability to regulate once we have this incredible power. The same thing with literacy rates, unfortunately. As literacy increased, all of a sudden now that access to information that we thought was gonna bring so much good, it turns out that now we're seeing things like the suicide rates going up, and so just access to unfettered information doesn't necessarily shape the soul in helpful ways. And so we're trying to figure out how is it that we can be transformed in helpful and good ways. So when we think about each of the tools that we have, there are these implicit messages that we don't always realize, that all of the things that were built in the 50s, we thought this is gonna make life easier, but what really happened is that we bought bigger houses, right? We ended up engaging in a different behavior, and we didn't actually get the benefit out of those things. We thought the internet was gonna bring us all this great information, but we really learned that we can do anything from anywhere at any time, and we don't really need to be anywhere at any time. And so that's made us incredibly disconnected people because we learned something different than we thought we were gonna learn. So I think to somewhat with generative AI, one of the biggest issues underneath for all the good that it does is that we get this, what we would call results without becoming. We're able to produce something, but we don't actually become that thing. And so if we want to become certain kinds of people, there's gonna be places where we need to set aside the food or set aside the ability to go somewhere through a vehicle, but actually do something with our own bodies. Now we need to do the same thing with our own minds. And so I think of it as the difference of something like this. Do you wanna be someone who can look up the length of a marathon, or do you wanna be the type of person who can run a marathon? Do you wanna have access to information, or do you want something internal into your body and your mind and who you become? So this is gonna be, I think, the big challenge for us as we move forward. What type of people do we wanna be? What type of community do we wanna be? When do we wanna seed a skill to a technology? When do we wanna learn that skill and then augment it with the tools? So here's just a few last things that I wanna give us, just 6 little things that I think will be helpful for us as we close. One of these is just remember, AI is already everywhere, so you're already using it. So there's no worry that you can have. We're fully immersed in it, and so it's worth us experimenting and trying to figure out. The next one I think is to go, technology is a good gift from God, but we're always tempting to idolize it in both directions, both in terms of letting it be an alternative form of goodness and power, but also that it idolizes us in the sense that we believe that we should be like it. Then this idea that every technology we use is always gonna form us in some way. And so we wanna think about, how do I avoid going into this world of just ease? How do I go into a world of effort that actually makes me the type of person that I want to be? So when I think about this, I think it's best for us probably to learn some level of a skill first, and then to accelerate that skill with some type of AI or technology. If we start with the AI, we're never gonna develop that deeper sense. And some things I think are great to see that way. You're just gonna have to make calculated decisions in your own life about who you want to become. And so this is this idea, experiment widely, but I think it's best for us to do this in communities of faith and in communities within our own companies so that we're all experimenting and learning from one another, because the more we do things in isolation, the worse it always is for us. And lastly is this, again, focus on becoming rather than results. For our jobs, of course, we do need results. For our life, we need results, but we want to remember that we are to be not conformed into the image of this world, but transformed in the image of the Son. And so as we do that, we're going to sometimes need to take on hard things and sometimes cede it over to a technology. So again, this is my hope for you, that you be hopeful, that you embrace the benefits, but at the same time that you're able to be realistic about you, ourselves, and what's going on with humanity. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for letting me just talk rapid fire for a while. Thank you all.
Thank you, Paul. And we're going to bring up the stools here in just a moment. Again, thanks for being with us this evening. And we are grateful to everyone who submitted questions ahead of time. When you signed up, there was a place where you could do that. We got a lot of questions, and that really helped us as we were putting the event together, helped Dr. Dyer shape what he was doing. So thanks for doing that. Also, you've been able to text questions throughout this time as well. And so we are going to have an opportunity. We're not going to get to all of those questions, certainly tonight, but hopefully today we are looking for some common themes and some ideas that are sort of linking a lot of those that our panel can address tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and bring our panel up here. So if I can have George and Tracy and John come on back up, I'll stay here and you guys can join me. But you've already met John, so he's on our panel tonight. But I want to introduce to you two others who are joining us, George and Tracy, both members here at Christ Community. And we're really grateful to have both of you. And it's awesome that you're both in Kansas City and a part of Christ Community, because truly you could be on a stage on this panel anywhere on these topics. So we're really grateful. So Tracy serves as the co-founder and executive director of Screen Sanity, which is an organization that partners with parents and community leaders to help children specifically develop healthy digital habits. And Tracy worships at our Leawood campus. And then George Brooks is the co-founder and CEO of Crema, which is an award-winning design and technology consultancy. As a user experience designer by trade, that's what George is trained as. He's also a self-described accidental entrepreneur. And so George has spent the past decade growing and shaping Crema. And he's also a member right here at our Olathe campus and serves as a member of our elder leadership team right now. So we're really grateful, for George, for your leadership on that team. So please welcome me in joining the panel here. Well, to begin with, we actually used some AI tools to analyze the questions that you all submitted when you signed up, and to identify some common themes that were in those. And this is something that large language models do really well. Tell me the top 5 themes in these kinds of questions. And so I'd like to start with a few of these questions that sort of were pulled from what you registered when you signed up. And so here's the first one, panel. In a world where AI can generate increasingly convincing content, which we just saw a live demonstration of, how can Christians maintain their commitment to the truth while utilizing these tools? So what spiritual and practical guidelines should we consider as we think about that?
Well, I've been talking a lot, so how about you guys?
Man, how do I follow your talk, though? So I think this is a question about trust, right? For a lot of this conversation for me is a conversation about what we trust, and I think increasingly we've lacked trust between each other. We've lacked trust between our technology. So, for example, how many of you actually pick up your phone to a number you don't recognize? Most of you will say never, right? We used to pick up our phone just when it rang on the wall, right? And now we don't pick it up unless we have that number saved. And I think we're going to see an increase in that distrust of anything and everything, and which is in some ways sad, but it will force us to then question, what do we truly trust? And I think that there's something interesting about the community of Christ that comes together, right? Where we build community as both a family and as a faith, and trusting with each other and a God who loves and has made us. And I think it's an interesting way for us to think about this conversation about trust. And as our trust decreases for the things that maybe we've been looking at a lot, whether it's on our phones or in media or whatever that might be, I think we find ourselves looking for what can we really trust in. That's my thought.
This doesn't give a solution to that, but I think that issue of trust is one thing that plays out a lot for our kids. So I specifically sit from, how does this affect families and kids who are growing up in a digital world that we never did? And when we were kids, we implicitly, unless our parent had some reason to violate our trust very deeply, trusted the things that those trusted adults around us said. And one thing that's really interesting now is, this was research from a few years ago that showed 94% of teens would ask Google before they would ask their parent. And I actually think, where were those other 6%? I'm shocked that it wasn't 100%, because what happens now is, for some reason, even though we as adults and parents have shown so much trustworthiness to our kids, they are very quickly able to become captivated by very knowledgeable sources in a variety of contexts. Be it ChatGPT, oh, Mom, you actually were wrong about that. In fact, let me tell you, here are all the specific details that this did to this question. Or you were trying to come up with a cute rhyme, and actually here are all the other things. Or Google, or podcasters, or social media influencers. I mean, the types of things that our kids will hear in what sounds like a trustworthy way is just beyond what we could ever imagine about, filing down your teeth so that you can look pretty enough. And it's just really powerful to see how much that trust for our kids is a very confusing thing. And how do you earn that trust? And how do you prove to your kids that you are the one who's really in it with them and for them?
I might just add to all these wonderful thoughts that I think the order of our knowledge isn't particularly good, and what's the most important types of knowledge. So we might care a lot about, it really does matter what's happening in Israel and the Middle East. I mean, those are important things to God. They may not be as important for us to have accurate information as maybe knowing about the state of our neighbor's life. And so we are much less likely to invest any time and effort into getting to know those houses that are right around us as we are trying to research something online. So I do think we want to look at what are the most important things for us to know. Most of the time, those are very local things. Those are very relational things, but those are often the hardest, riskiest things for us to get access to. The things that we least need to know about are the easiest to get to and also the easiest to be disinformed about and to get enraged about. So I think if we flip that whole thing over, maybe a lot of the things that we're worried about disinformation really aren't that important to us being faithful believers in our city and in our context.
I love that localization and prioritization of that local relationship. That's really key. Wow. Okay, here's one that kind of came in from the room just tonight. I loved this distinction or this category, the promise that you gave there, sort of what AI is, the message we're actually getting from it, which is results without becoming or effort. I'm going to be thinking a lot about that one. Here's a question related to that. I'm curious for all of you on the panel, has your own use of AI led to any deformation for you in your heart, soul, life that you've noticed? How can we guard against that? What are some ways it could lead, what does it say? Has it led or could lead to deeper formation in the way of Jesus?
I think I've been more deformed by the previous generation of technology. So I think, for example, early in the early 2000s, I loved Twitter. I thought it was the funnest place for Christian content and programmer content. And now it's kind of a dumpster fire. And yet I still find myself drawn to it. And so I probably waste so much time there by just the algorithm knows what I want but don't need. So I think more of those. I think that the generative hasn't quite gotten to me yet, but I think if I was susceptible to the previous generation, I certainly am to this one. And so I'm probably deceiving myself in some way on that.
I'll say a way that it's helped deepen. I'm glad you asked this because I have a Christmas gift recommendation for anyone with a teen or tween out there. Our family is obsessed with I'm not sure the exact name. I can give an Amazon link afterwards or put it in the comments somehow, but the Gen Z Bible. And it was just like Dr. Dyer's Y'all version when I saw that you share that. But someone, Brother Yosef is the official author's name, but took all of the New Testament. It's in 2 separate parts. And actually one person, at least in this room, is already getting this for Christmas. So don't order it too fast if you know me personally. But what it does is it takes all of the Bible. It actually was based on the King James Version even, and it translates it and spices it up with major riz, major aura points, all of these things. And it's really interesting because I've heard from some people, because my 13-year-old has brought it to youth group, that it was actually discouraging to one of the youth group leaders. They felt like it did, bring them down to see, oh, well, this was created by this. But in the right context, and I'm not saying it's perfect, and I did not go to seminary, I'm not giving it that type of a credential, but it has been so powerful just as a family for us to talk about whatever passage they read in the service and then share it in that other interesting version, right? It's like the Message, how it makes you think about it differently. So that's a little bit of place where it has helped with formation. But I think one small downside of it is I am married to someone who, he's an engineer by trade, but he's really good at writing, especially poetry and songs. And for my birthday or something recently, he wrote me this beautiful poem. But my first question was like, hey, did ChatGPT actually write that? Because he uses ChatGPT a lot for things at work. And he was like, well, yeah, of course, to be efficient, but then I edited 90% of it. And he was like, and I was like, oh, well, that's great. And I love it. It's beautiful. It was based on his ideas, but it no longer makes me feel that same fullness. His birthday happens to be 5 days later. My son wrote a poem for him using ChatGPT, and he was like, hey, do you even mean what that poem says? Do you really think I'm that awesome? So I just think there are a lot of ways where you can lean on it and it's breaking down. That's not like it's breaking down my faith, but it's just a small way where it's causing missed connections even when there was really good intention behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would add a lot to this, except that I think it's definitely reprogrammed my brain. And I'm aware of it. I'm very self-aware of it, that I don't think to myself, there was a period in time previous, like you said, that like the last, I would think, oh, I'm going to go to Twitter for that answer. I'm going to go Google it, right? When we all thought that Googling something was crazy. Now it's like, oh yeah, you just Google it. You can find the answer. Now I don't think about Googling it at all. My default is to go, I'll just ask the LLM, or I'll ask ChatGPT, or I'll ask whatever, whatever I'm using. And I think that will become normal. But it also reprograms the way we think, right? Because we used to have to learn things, memorize them, recall them either through ourselves or through echoing it through each other. And now we got to a point where we could offset a lot of that knowledge by putting in a search engine in a database someplace. And now even further, we're going to get to the place where we can offset even more of our cognitive load into something else. And I do feel that. I don't know if it's deformation. I think that's still to be seen. But I'm very self-aware that I now think, the easiest way to answer this would be to use an AI.
It makes me think, Andy Crouch in his newest book talks about the trade-offs, right, that are in technology. And with every new technology, even if it's just writing down something on a piece of paper, there's a promise of something that you'll no longer have to do, you'll be able to, but correspondingly means now there's something you'll have to do, and something you won't be able to do anymore. So he gives the example just of writing. Now you won't have to remember stuff, but now you'll have to write it down, and you won't be able to remember stuff like you used to. So there's those trade-offs for sure. Well, you mentioned, Tracy, this example of kind of poetry and art, and this is one of those places where I think people who are producing creative content for a living are really concerned or have questions about this. So there's a lot of concern in creative disciplines about their art being used to train models without permission that generates derivative art. As Christians, what should our response be for using AI-generated art and music? So to follow up with that, who owns the right to that intellectual property created by AI? We should probably have a lawyer up here to maybe talk about that one, but I'd love anything. And what are ethical considerations in that conversation?
So there's a lot of people trying to solve this right now. This is both in the faith community as well as in the kind of technological community, and mostly because of the business behind art, right? So there is a certain sense that art has a value, and they want to make sure that value is attributed to the right person. I will say they haven't really completely figured it out. There are ways that we're looking at watermarking, so being able to say we'll maybe have some regulation around that says that you have to watermark certain AI to be kind of printed. But people won't do that, right? You'll get around that. The same way that we have fakes of prints or digital reproduction of lots of art today. I think that the thing is to be mindful about when you're generating it, do you know something about the tool you're using? This is very difficult because it's moving so fast, you may not know about that tool. So for example, our company, we were looking at making like a holiday experience, I think it was last Christmas. And we wanted to create this thing that would like make some art through an LLM, and you could pick out some things, and then you could be in the photo with the AI generated art. And we were using an existing platform that had just come out with a press release, or the press had just come out about the fact that they were definitely stealing the art, to the point where it was like the Getty Images logo was still showing up in the AI generated pieces. So it was like obvious that they were sourcing data where they shouldn't have been. And so we went over to a different model that at least had a commitment towards saying we're not. But the problem is these things are built off of crawlers, right? So these algorithms are going out and saying, I'm going to find as much content as I can because I'm trying to tune myself, or I'm trying to learn what this image ought to be. And so I think this is, again, it's a little bit of the Wild West of being able to do that well. So I think it's just using caution, using as much as you feel comfortable with, doing a little bit of research into the company that you're using, especially if you're going to use it in a way that might benefit or create value in return. So if you're going to make money off of something using generative created material, make sure that the company that you're using has that in their policy or in their license, or has at least made some efforts to create a model that is catching those things. And then I think in the future we'll see regulation come around that, around watermarking in some way, but it's gonna be tough.
Yeah. Tracy or John,
It's a very nerdy question, though.
That's good. Thank you, George, on that one. Yeah, here's another one. Kind of in that area of what you're just talking about, George. Do you see, and any of you here, any risks in over-regulation of AI technology, particularly in the realm of censorship, power centralization, and artificial, pun intended, the person says here, limiting of worldviews that are used to train the models? So, I mean, this is one of those things you're kind of, with your optimism and honesty, realism, like how do we thread that regulatory needle, and is there actually some harm in over-regulation?
Yeah, man, there was one whole set of ideas that was saying everything should be open source, so you can see all of what's going on, so that we should force that. And I think the concern of that is that it allows for all kinds of bioterrorism and stuff like that, where you can learn how to do anything that would normally have required a chemistry degree or something like that. So then there's this flip side of, should we then, keep them all closed or keep certain types of information closed? So I think it's going to be really hard to do. I don't know that we're going to be terribly successful at it. I mean, you remember when the EU tried to pass a bunch of things about cookies, and now we have to click OK a lot on every website. And I don't know that it actually did much to it, because none of us know what it means. So I think that it's similar. You just accept or reject and you move on. So I think this is going to be really, really hard to do. And I think, like you mentioned, trying to do some research on your own, of trying to do your best to have some due diligence in it. But I hope we start to see some things come out, but our governments haven't been super educated on this, and it's really hard to do, to be honest.
Well, I just don't have a lot of faith that it even is likely to happen, because when we look at a lot of our technology platforms right now, again, I come from the youth angle, but there are a lot of things that they could and should, in my mind, be providing guidelines, limitations. I don't want to call it censorship, although honestly, yes, I would love for them to censor explicit child sexual assault material off the internet. Right? And yet, even when, I know this is being televised, or not televised, but on the screen, so I can't talk about this publicly, but I've had very senior level conversations with some of these large platforms who absolutely justify having video tutorials on their platform about how to use blah, blah, blah to commit suicide, with child sexual assault content openly on their platform. And there is no sense that that's something that they are likely to take down, and they just point to the First Amendment. So I would say, I don't think we've even reached that in some of our existing technology platforms, and so I don't know how we can do that here. And this is broader than just your question, but I think that's why I do want to be hopeful in the other, like maybe H's that you shared, Dr. Dyer, so nicely. But I think it's interesting. I mean, Silicon Valley has this mantra of like move fast and break things. And our most recent technological introductions have broken a lot of things. And we haven't even yet figured out how to really fix those while we're still going into a big, new, bold frontier. And so I just think it'll be interesting to see, can we try to learn from some of those things as we put this into place?
Yeah, I agree. I think that on both sides of this, there's the need to figure out what we think is Judeo-Christian values. I mean, if we come back to like, what is morality? Why is that bad? Why can we not show those things? And we come back to these foundational truths, and then there has to be some kind of cultural alignment around those truths in order to then put the regulations and laws around those truths. Now, that is very difficult to do in this day and time. That being said, there are organizations that are trying to create, and it's kind of like using the weapon to fight the weapons, right? They're using AI modeling. So for example, I will say we worked on a product years ago that was going to be a consumer level product, and it was going to allow crowdsourcing of people putting content on. This is way pre-AI, but it's just going to allow people to post something on the internet. When you allow people to post things on the internet, they post great, beautiful things, and they post the worst things ever at the same time. The way to get around doing that is that you would hire very, very low-cost human workers, human people, to look at everything that was posted. Everything. The worst things that humans have ever done are posted on the internet, and they had to look at it, and they had to see it, and they had to decide that it shouldn't be on the internet. Now, you can imagine the mental toll that would be. Now, thank God that we now have an AI that can be trained to see those things that human beings don't have to look at them. So I think that's where you go, okay, interesting. You could use the tool to fight for these things that ought to be. But then you have to decide, you have to share on what are we deciding is right or wrong. But I think that's where I get excited is the potential of these models, or even biases models now. Again, you see the pendulum swing, but you can actually string together the models, right? There's the foundational models that we all know of for the chat GPTs and the clouds and those things like that. But then you can put another model up next to it that has its kind of rule set that will live, and actually it will start to inform itself on, we want to inform our biases more correctly. But again, the way that you train these models is by giving a thumbs up or a thumbs down. You either got it right or you got it wrong. Now there's a bias coming from the person. So what you have to do is create a very diverse group of people that come into those and actually train those bias models representing a large group of people. So I think it's going to be this, how do we use the tool to better the tool properly?
It's really good. Here, as kind of a different angle, as we think about an increasing kind of maybe saturation or just a lot of people using AIs, this is a question. Do you think there's going to be some level of counterculture rejection of AI at some point due to human beings having a need for real connection, authenticity? What might that rejection look like, and how could the church be well positioned to thoughtfully engage help in the midst of that? So yeah, any hints of maybe kind of a rejection of some of this and a getting back to just real thing? I don't want anything to do with that. Yeah.
There was a book a couple years ago called The Revenge of the Analog, people wanting to get, records instead of digital music, and, the whole set of things of people wanting, craft coffee, craft beer, anything local. So I think there's always going to be movements to that of people wanting to go away. But I think it will be a mix. I mean, you find your favorite craft coffee on the internet. That's how you get there. So you're still going to use some, combination of these things to do it. But yeah, I think even you can't upload a video on YouTube without marking it, whether or not it has AI generated content. So most of the big systems are making sure that you mark that type of thing. So I think you're seeing a movement toward that. And I think we all long for it, just like we long for exercise and Whole Foods. It's just that we do drift back into these things at certain points.
I mean, every time I talk on AI, I always talk about the fact, and I hope my mom sees one of these videos at some point, because this is important, that AI will get us to the point where, going back to the trust conversation, where we won't trust that I'm actually maybe I don't even know if you're real right here. I don't know. We'll see. But for sure we won't know that the person on the phone or the person on the video or the person even that is calling you think, well, no, if they call me, I'll know. But you can do real-time voice translations where it sounds like someone who's not you, right? So you could get to the point where that's already scamming people and taking advantage, especially of those that are not technologically mature. So my recommendation is go visit. Like my mom will get scammed, right? Especially as she ages, they're going to take advantage of those that are aging. And so the best way for me to love my mom is not to call her; it's to go visit her. Wow. Right? And so I think that's going to be a really powerful thing, that it's actually going to lead us back to being in spaces again together. Whether it's a third space outside of the church, my hope is that actually where you'll see the cyclical nature of Christendom, where we come. Tim Keller used to talk about this a lot, of this idea of you can see it throughout history, right? And so, is this the wake that's pulled out for the wake to come back in? That's my hope.
I think it'll also be interesting to see how that plays out across different demographic groups. So years ago, we were interviewed by the New York Times, had no idea what this article was going to be called, did not feel pleased with it. But it was called Human Connection, the New Luxury Good. And that was really compelling, but what it was basically sharing in really stark details that have been very meaningful to us in the growth of our work that we've done over the past many years is the fact that kids with means actually have way less time on traditional screens. This was written like 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. Kids with means have way less time on technology than their under-resourced peers. Why is that? In many ways, it's part of what I heard in Dr. Dyer's speech, which is, hey, sometimes AI or technology can provide something better than what they had before. So we actually can celebrate that, but we can easily fall too much into that. And so I think of even what you were saying, George, like that human connection, that letter that you actually think was written and signed in paper will start to be something so compelling and so good. And it'll be interesting to see how it plays across society.
I think the one thing that I'll add to this, though, is that we might find that we actually limit ourselves. You talked about the power consumption of AI, and I don't know if we'll get to this in the question, so I'll just mention it here, because I think this is where actually ravenous like hunger for all this technology may actually be very quickly halted by the fact that we can't actually power it. So a number of our clients are the people that we serve at Crim are construction engineering firms. And a lot of these firms, especially in Kansas City, are building large-scale data centers because it's like an oil rush, right? That they can't build enough data centers fast enough. Well, the problem with that is that AI takes approximately 10x the amount of power to compute a unit of measure than a normal computing, like just saving and fetching the information. So when you think about 10x, right, we're already using a lot of electricity to power Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, right, for videos. Now 10x that, and at the 250 million users that are using ChatGPT and more, you're going to just see that go through the roof. So some of them have done environmental studies that have basically said within the next, we'll say X number of years, because I don't know how much this is public knowledge. So we'll just say X number of years, we'll start to see brownouts. So you might hear of other countries experiencing brownouts, but we'll start to experience brownouts because of our need for AI. So you'll actually see the lights start to flicker, right? Or sections of cities or areas that we know that we don't have enough power to keep the lights on. And then not that much further in the studies, maybe just a few years out from that, we'll have full blackouts where we say, no, we could take the entire thing off the grid. And most of that will be led from EV, a massive move to electrical vehicles, and then this AI movement. And not only is it just the fact that we don't have enough nuclear power or coal or renewable energy, but also the grid is not ready for it. So it's kind of a nerdy thing, but I think that actually it's a little bit interesting that we might find ourselves being limited by the physical structures themselves.
Do you have any concern that the AIs would turn us into batteries and we would live in a simulation at which...
And how do we get out of the matrix? Yeah. I do. No.
This whole conversation recently was like, I need to go back and rewatch those movies. That's really good. Okay, here's a question from someone in the room. It says, I'm a data scientist and build and deploy AI models in my day-to-day work. How can I do my daily work well with the flourishing of humanity in mind when the driving force of AI development is ultimately financial gain for the companies and corporations that license it? So this person says, how can I work I'm just doing my job, going into work on Tuesday morning tomorrow. How can I do that in a way that helps humanity flourish when I know that profit is kind of the financial gain for these corporations is the thing underneath it all?
Oh, this is a tricky one. I think that there's something to say for the efficiency gain that we will get from AI. There's no questions. Is it going to replace jobs? Yes, is the answer. And so if you wanted me to come here and say, no, it won't replace jobs, I would be lying. It will definitely replace jobs. It's already replacing jobs. Yet so has every other technology in human history has replaced jobs. And if you go look up the posters, I won't share them because they're not appropriate for a church stage, but like the public posters that they used to make for trying to convince the general public not to buy an automobile, so they were trying to fear people out of buying an automobile, were very inappropriate because they were really trying to scare people to say, don't buy automobiles, this is going to replace our horse and buggy industries or this whole industries that were based around the way that we moved things. And I think not all businesses are only ever profit driven. Right? And I think that that's the way we can feel sometimes because profits is a means by which we make sure that we are running our businesses well, we're providing for stakeholders that are involved, that we are actually looking for the next valuable good that we can produce. Now, profit is not inherently evil, right? I mean, it can feel like that. We could say like the nonprofits Jesus loves the nonprofits and Jesus doesn't like the profits. If you go to this church, you know that we would talk about connecting our Sunday to our Monday, right? I think that the challenge there is some discernment about the work that we did no matter what it is. So whether it's being a data scientist to produce AI that possibly is going to create some efficiencies that might actually remove people's jobs, might be the same as you saying, well, I'm going to work in a manufacturing facility that processes meat, but that's going to remove the butcher's job, right? And we have to work with integrity to go, how can I view my work as leading to the flourishing of people? And so then you can connect back to the greater good of maybe the value of what the organization is doing. And we think about that at Crema, right? I transparently, I nerded out over the weekend. So my company designs and writes apps, some of them with AI in them. And over the weekend, I went down a rabbit hole. I'm not gonna lie.
Keep going, George.
Okay, I'm just a little confession on stage, where I've tried out lots of different apps that can write code for me, and they're okay. They're not great, but they're okay. And I found a newer one that was great. Now, it was frustrating, and you had to be patient with it, and you had to work with it and kind of prompt it back and forth. But what I was able to do is I was able to recreate something that took my team about a month and a half to build, about 2 months to build. Are we done? It took me about a month and a half to build. For the team of developers working on it, I was able to do it almost as good, if not better, in about 5.5 hours. Okay, so what do I do with that? Now, and immediately the next morning I got up and I called my leadership team and I said, hey, we have to look at this. This is where our industry is going. We can't pretend that it's not going there. But I also understand that this will scare our team, right? This is going to really rock them, and so how do we manage that expectation and love them, and also think about cross-training them, and also thinking about bringing them up into what the value that we can bring, and that maybe that we can actually lower our prices to help more people build apps when we previously couldn't do that before because we were too expensive. There's all these ways that you can start to think through it. So it's not just profit-driven. I think it's about looking at the holistic view of the business. At least that's my take.
Either of you guys have anything to add on that one?
No, I think you've summarized so many things that this is the problem we all have with all of our jobs in some way, is that we're doing something for profit and we're trying to figure out how do we make that matter in some way. And I think that the models of faith that work, there's the share the gospel at work and that's it, or there's the, do ethical things, don't steal the company pens, and there's all those different models, or just do it to the glory of God. But I do think speaking into these things and saying a company doesn't have to go into that profit-driven area. So you could have, in that moment, you could have just ducked your head and not done anything about it, or run away from it, or said, man, this is going to make me a ton more money. What can I go buy with this? But you're entering into that conversation and leading it. And so to the person who asked the question, I'm glad you're there. I'm glad you're a believer in Jesus Christ at that company and able to direct those conversations. I think that's what we're called to do, is to be that light there.
Yeah, the language of faithful presence from James Hunter, I think, is so important here, and we need Christians in all these different industries who are a faithful presence in those spaces. So again, whoever's out there, thank you for your work and being in that space. Okay, just a couple more questions here, and then we'll wrap up. But maybe I'll start with Tracy on this one. How can parents and church leaders, you've got a room probably full of a lot of parents and church leaders here, guide the next generation to use AI wisely while fostering genuine spiritual and personal growth?
So I think this is a hard question to answer really quickly. I'm eager to hear the others' answers as well, but I'll share a few broader principles that we generally think of with technology. One is that when it comes to technology, parents tend to abdicate their role as mentor and guide. We tend to feel like we don't understand the latest craze. Our kids are smarter than us at fill in the blank. That's how it's been for years, even before generative AI was on the landscape. And so because of that, we just kind of defer, and it's almost like our own little digital divide of sorts. You can go over there, I'll be here, and I don't have anything to offer you. But I think it's worth just remembering that we are still the people who care about them most in their life and who want to mentor and guide them through the realities of life, through the realities of dealing with loneliness or hardships or whatever those things might be. And so even if we don't know the most about technology, we still have really good, valuable things to add and to speak into their life. So that's one of the first things. The second thing I would say is to really do that with empathy. What our kids are facing, we never faced. I never had the opportunity to take my boyfriend's face and I hope I wouldn't have done this, but who knows? Out of curiosity, be like, ooh, let's create an image depicted, nude, right? I couldn't have done that. But the same traits that caused us to do different things that pushed the limits are the same types of things that our kids are doing today, but the platforms and the resources that they have allow them to go a lot further, a lot faster into realms that are probably just a lot more dangerous than we ever had the option of doing. And so understanding it's hard for them and being quick to not just judge and criticize your kid as, oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that. But just understand like, wow, tell me more about how that works. So a lot around conversations. And then the third thing I'll say is just really be curious about it. If your kid would be likely to answer that pie chart and say, I use it every day, and you are currently in the circle that says, I've never used it, this is your chance to use it and start trying to find the ways where you use it. I remember when Bill visited Leawood and he shared an image of a guy, he was talking about the parapet, I think, talking about a guy falling off the roof, and he's like, let me show you some of the errors in this picture. And like, we all laughed. So we as adults can still model to our kids, hey, here's how I tried to use AI today, and I sent an email to someone that said this. What do you guys think? Has that ever happened to you? Or, hey, I did this, what do you think of that? And then also try to find some ways, you want to maximize the benefits. There are benefits while minimizing the side effects. So are there ways that you can teach your kids to use some of those good parts of AI? If you send out like a family Christmas newsletter, maybe ask your kid, hey, can you work with ChatGPT and see what it comes up with for our family Christmas letter? Or if you have a teenager who helps you with food, with meals, like, hey, why don't we sit down and ask together ChatGPT to create a meal plan for us? The two big things that it does is, number one, it models the positive uses, because our kids generally are more exposed to the entertainment-y sides than to the productivity sides. And then it also gives you an opportunity to talk about it, to laugh about the recipe that supposedly, was supposed to be great. And was that really that good? And where are some of the failings? Or how did you feel about that? Because the more that we can come alongside our kids and say, hey, we're here to help. When do you fall into crazy random things with this or any other technology? I think is when we can really create more of that trust that we were talking about earlier.
It's really helpful, Tracy. Either of you.
I think the only small thing that we do as a family, inconsistently, I'll admit, we're not perfect at this, that we have better weeks than others, is using the spiritual disciplines and applying it to technology as well. So whether it's AI or technology in general, we attempt to, most Sundays, do a technology fast. So kind of either whether you want to call that Sabbath or if the fasting practice is to try to figure out how do we just step away from not having technology on Sundays. So it's either, not having our phones or not turning on the TV or whatever that is. And it's not, like 24 full hours. We don't do a full Shabbat, but it's the idea of like, can we get through from waking up in the morning and it not being the first thing we grab to at least getting to sundown is kind of our goal. And that sounds like, oh my gosh, can't get to sundown? Yeah, you try it. Okay? It's tough. And there are reasons that it's impractical and it's not helpful. And the kids need to do their homework and they're all doing them on iPads now. And so, but how do we prepare the rest of the week to have this time of fasting, which then forces us to have those disciplines that say, it's not unusual for me to set it down.
I love how that connects to what Dr. Dyer was saying. As we get increasing power of technology, do we have the commensurate sort of increase of self-discipline and self-control? And I think you're modeling that, which is hard, but we have to do it. Yeah, John, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, these were all such good examples of good disciplines as a family, of good rules of life, of having empathy for your kids. I mean, I think a lot of us probably grew up in generations where our parents didn't do a lot with us, kind of let us go off, and then, we probably developed a lot of grit and resiliency, but we weren't real emotionally close. And I think our generation of parents is much more emotionally close to our kids, but I think sometimes that makes us, we're always trying to reduce their pain and difficulty. And so then we're predisposed to when they experience a level of difficulty, we want to lower that. And so when the difficulty is, I don't have a phone and everybody else does, that becomes a real challenging part. But you think we've been doing this for a long time, guys. I mean, we don't let kids drive cars by themselves until a certain age. And we don't let people vote until a certain age. But we hand kids phones at 3 and expect it not to do anything to them. So I think that like you said, that advocating our responsibility as parents and sometimes being willing to disappoint our kids and go, they are our friends, but we are their parents first. And when they turn 18, we can become their friends. So that being willing to put our kids in situations that they're disappointed with their life and they're disappointed with us, those are actually the things that make them the kind of person that we want them to be as adults. So being willing to do that, I think, is important. And then being willing to self-reflect, because a lot of times our kids have grown up looking at the back of our phones, and so that's their experience of parenting sometimes, and so we need to own that part of ourselves, because they're going, you're telling me to do something that you don't do yourselves, and so us owning that and modeling that and continuing to have dialogue is so important.
That's really good. Okay, this is going to be our last question, and I'd love for each of you to weigh in on this one. Just looking ahead at how AI might shape the future of ministry, worship, church, just culture broadly, how do you stay anchored to hope? Because we're, as followers of Jesus, we're people to be marked by hope. And so what keeps you hopeful?
I think the Holy Spirit's activity for the last 2,000 years keeps me hopeful, and that there have been a lot of ups and downs, a lot of dark times, and he has kept the Church of Jesus Christ going, and that's more important than America or my family or my state or whatever it is, or whatever election is happening, that there's a bigger story happening, and I get to be a part of that. So there's going to be ups and downs, but there's a larger thing that I know how it ends.
Yeah, that's great.
I don't know if I can say anything better than that. I think honestly, I'm seeing, I think I mentioned this earlier, this kind of cyclical nature of Christendom. I'm seeing it right now, and I've had so many friends that deconstructed their faith over the last decade, and I think a lot of it was cultural, a lot of it was technology driven from the distraction of technology, and then a disconnect from a community like this. But man, the conversations I'm having now is there's this curiosity, there's this longing to say, well, this didn't do what I thought it would do. And I think AI is, again, we could go back to the AI. It will do amazing things, and it already does amazing things. And it will blow our minds to do even more amazing things, and it will change the world as we know it. But it will never be God. And I think that I'm seeing that curiosity peak back up in my peers and in my friends, and that gives me hope.
Yeah, I'll echo that. This isn't the biggest, most grand hope, but just very practically, we work a lot with youth, and it's really interesting to see that as kids are aging, let's say like upper teens, early 20s, they are starting to even express some of the things that you were talking about, Dr. Dyer, of like, hey, I didn't love that my parents made this choice for me, and I am so grateful that they did. And in all the different contexts that I'm in, I've never heard a kid say that they actually are still really pissed. And if only they had been able to, worry about the number of likes they had, whatever. Because in the moment, they don't like it, but with that perspective. So I think that's building on what you said, where it does give me hope that there's a little bit of a pendulum. But also, like, even if I'm an Enneagram 6, even if Terminator 2 comes and we do all die, God's good. We don't our hope is not in my child ever living to a ripe age and whatever. It's like, okay, God, who knows? So at the highest level, that gives me hope.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tracy. Let's thank our panel for being there tonight. Yeah, we're really grateful. Thank you. Thank you, John.